The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I am Christina Morris, and I will serve as your administrator for the next hour. You have joined us for our Gaming in Crisis, the Path Back webinar series. We are very excited to have an expert panel to present this information to you. But before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items for today's presentation. The contents of this presentation are presented for general informational purposes only, and not for the purpose of providing legal advice. You should not consider any information provided to be legal advice and should not act upon any such information without seeking professional counsel. Use of this material or your attendance at this webinar does not create an attorney-client or any other relationship with the moderators, speakers, or panelists. I would now like to take a moment to thank the state associations from Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, and Nevada for coming together to help promote the webinar event to their tens of thousands of employees impacted by the world's events. I would also like to thank the Innovation Group, Regulatory Management Council, and Global Gaming Business Magazine, who has combined their talents and expertise to present the webinar series, designed to help gaming companies, operators, manufacturers, and supplier executives, employees, investors, and customers navigate the new normal as the world struggles through and emerges from the devastating effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Throughout the course of this crisis, the Gaming in Crisis webinar will indeed chart the path back for all segments of the industry. Experts in their fields will examine each and every impact with opinions and suggestions on how we mitigate those impacts. Please mark your calendar for our next program, next Thursday, April 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tribal Troubles, How Indian Gaming Will Rebound. The program will be moderated by Roger Groh, and the speakers that will be included are John J. James, Ray Penault, and Matthew Weesaw. You can register for this webinar at casinowebinar.com. To help facilitate efficiently and respect your time, all participants will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Questions, if you have them at any time, please submit them using the question panel box on the right side of your screen. Please note that today's presentation will be recorded. The recording will be shared to all attendees after the webinar has concluded. A copy of the webinar recording will also be made available at casinowebinar.com. I will now turn it over to Mr. Michael Soul from the Innovation Group to begin today's discussion. Michael, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Christina, and also thank you to all of our participants for taking the time. Before moving into today's program, I just wanted to briefly provide some context to the webinar series and where we see the industry today. When RMC and GGB and we at the Innovation Group first discussed this series a few long weeks ago at this point, our goal was to provide timely feedback from diverse industry peers on how they and their organizations were managing through the COVID-19 crisis. The only thing we knew for sure was that whatever themes we planned, the specifics would be a moving target, and that has definitely proven true. But what we had not contemplated was that despite very devastating impacts on our businesses, employees, and customers, that the industry would be so resilient. That may be premature characterization from an operational standpoint, certainly, but what you'll continue to see in today's session is that despite minimal federal assistance and with our biggest challenges still ahead, gaming has taken a leading role once again in finding light at the end of the tunnel. Treatment of our employees, preparation for reopening, and assertive financial management strategies are receiving national attention and are already showing the world what is possible. So with that, I'm pleased to present today's program, Taking Care of Business, Difficult Decisions Ahead. I'd now like to provide a brief introduction into the backgrounds of each of our speakers. First, being Bobby Soper is the founder and CEO of Sun Gaming and Hospitality. Prior to founding the company, he served in various executive roles, as many of you will know, including President and CEO of Mohegan Sun in Connecticut and in the Poconos, as well as President and CEO of the Mohegan parent company, Mohegan Gaming and Entertainment. Bobby's currently assisting clients in the financing, design, programming, and development of various projects, including large integrated resorts and resort amenities in the US, Latin America, and Asia. Take the next slide. Alan Whitmore is the Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary at Wynn Resorts. Upon joining Wynn, Ellen was well known for her gaming law and regulatory expertise, having represented some of the world's largest gaming companies before the Nevada Gaming Commission in licensing and gaming entertainment tax matters. She's also represented private equity companies investing in the industry and many of the leading gaming technology firms engaged in interactive and social gaming. And Josh Swissman is the founding partner of the Strategy Organization. He's got 20 years of experience in advertising, customer relationship management, brand strategy, marketing analytics, loyalty programs, and entertainment, having led multi-asset portfolio organizations. He's developed ambitious strategies to elevate profit by implementing loyalty programs and has put together initiatives to position organizations for growth and brand differentiation. Josh previously served as the Chief Marketing Officer with Station Casinos and held some positions at MGM along the way. So let's move right into Bobby. He's going to open the program today with an assessment of the range of reopening strategies that are out there. He'll highlight the importance of adaptability and flexibility in this endeavor. And in addition, he'll address the process of preparing to reopen and touch on marketing, communications considerations, and making the best of the challenges we face. Bobby?
Yes, thank you, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I appreciate the valuable time our listeners are giving for this webinar. I have had the opportunity the past couple of weeks to talk to numerous leaders in the industry who serve in various roles and disciplines, and I'd like to spend my time discussing some of the most material takeaways from those discussions, and also perhaps add a little color commentary from my own experience. First, I think it's important to take a step back and understand the context of our situation. While the casino industry, like many other industries, have faced uncertainty on numerous other occasions in the past, this type of uncertainty is unprecedented. The fact is that as it relates to COVID-19 and what we are dealing with upon reopening and thereafter, there is a wide range of potential different realities that may exist. And if you were to look at the range of scenarios, you may have at an extreme positive end of the spectrum, a situation where COVID-19 cases burn off, similar to how SARS did in 2003, and or effective treatments that are quickly developed and implemented, in which these cases would presumably result in a much more confident, secure community, leading to the material reduction of the most challenging social distancing requirements. And then on the other end, and most negative part of the spectrum, we could envision a new wave of flare-ups and outbreaks of COVID-19 or its mutations with no effective treatments and a vaccine that will take 18 or more months to implement and roll out, resulting in continued stringent social distancing limitations similar to what is in place today. And maybe we're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum of scenarios. Perhaps there's a widely distributed antibody test everyone is comfortable with, and the virus somewhat fades with limited cases, and we continue with social distancing policies in place, but albeit somewhat loosened from where we are today. It's all really a guess at this point. And of course, the range of possibilities not only include the physical and psychological attributes related to the pandemic, but also include the actual economic impact that has been created. What will unemployment be? Where will consumer confidence be? The problem is that on the spectrum of possibilities, no one exactly knows where we will be upon reopening, or in 6 months, or in 12 months for that matter. That makes planning that much more challenging. And planning, of course, means both operational planning as well as financial planning. Hence to my second point, planning with adaptability and flexibility becomes paramount. And so when I refer to adaptability and flexibility, in some regard, I'm referring to the permanency of changes that may be made in anticipation of the new world we are operating in. If you're bearish on the long-term prospects of improvement, perhaps as an operator, you take more permanent steps: physical reconfiguration of the gaming floor, complete repurposing of the buffet, et cetera, et cetera. If not so bearish, you'll likely avoid such permanent changes. Understanding the right balance is important. But more importantly, however, when referring to flexibility and adaptability, what I really would focus on is ensuring that the planning that is occurring now and will continue moving forward should accommodate as much as possible the potential various realities and situations that will exist and occur at reopening and beyond. Planning should accommodate different assumptions and scenarios. And for example, staffing plans might allow for casino floors at certain utilization levels and hotels at varying occupancy levels. Maybe we start at 25% and ramp up to 75% within 6 months, or maybe we end up starting at 50% and ramp up to 75% in 3 months. You get the picture. Importantly, the same methodology should apply to business forecasts, which should include various sensitivities based upon differing circumstances. Look, we all know our major non-gaming amenities feed off of and drive volumes to the gaming floor. What happens when your live entertainment and nightlife venues are closed, as well as probably a materially reduced or completely missing MICE product? There are many, many evolving scenarios of what amenities are open, various utilization levels of such amenities, and various levels of volumes, all driven by COVID-related measures and economic impacts. And the point here is that while a significant amount of work, the unprecedented uncertainty now requires us to scenario plan in a manner we have never done before, because simply there are no good historical comps for what we are dealing with today. Fortunately, we at least have other markets in Asia who are several weeks ahead of us in this operating environment that we can look to, though those are distinctly different markets, especially relative to the overwhelming drive-in regional markets here in the U.S. Undoubtedly, scenario planning for this new world of operating will be a tremendous challenge for operators, which leads me to my third bullet point: actual operational planning. As I led off with, I've had a decent amount of conversations with various organizations on their approach with various elements of the property as it relates to their expectations and preparation upon reopening and potential plans thereafter. I would like to give a shout out to Ellen's organization, WIN, who, as many of you know, published their initial health and sanitation plan last week, which is a very positive and proactive thing to do for our industry. I believe many of the processes and procedures they adopted in this initial plan are consistent with what leadership at other properties are leaning toward. Perhaps there are some differing philosophies or approaches on a few of the planning items, since, as you would naturally expect, every property and organization is uniquely different. But fundamentally, it is safe to say there is primarily a commonality of approach. Of course, each jurisdiction is different, and the expectations and requirements of the respective regulatory bodies and gaming commissions will also dictate particular policies and approaches. Generally speaking, actions that will be taken regarding testing, protection, social distancing, and sanitizing are a major focus in every area of the operations. For testing, assuming we are in a situation that is similar to where we are at today, and assuming no transformational improvement on that spectrum of scenarios that I referred to before, it seems a majority of properties are exploring and likely will be committed to using non-invasive thermal cameras to screen temperatures at entrances for guests and employees. This will, of course, implicate numerous issues related to training, procedure, and execution, as well as guest privacy. I believe there is an expectation, at least at this point in time, that guests and team members will also be wearing masks, something that we would never have imagined before. Of course, like many of these new procedures, this will also require feedback and approval of regulators. For social distancing, it requires comprehensive planning and implicates major challenges. Again, let's assume an environment with heavy social distancing measures in place. And looking on the casino floor as it relates to tables, for the primary banking games, the consensus is that blackjack will see 3 patrons max per table, with a patron at each corner spot and 1 in the middle. And for games with non-dedicated seats and spots such as craps and roulette, for example, there may be some different approaches. The prevailing feeling seems to be that they'll keep them operational, but have a limit of 3 patrons at the table. But implementing consistent social distancing will clearly be a challenge and may require some real effort. For poker, while some operators may give it a go, it seems the consensus is that many will not reopen with the poker product under stringent social distancing environment. It is a social distancing nightmare, and as operators know, not usually a great contributor to the EBITDA line anyways. Now for slots, there is a consensus that in the current environment, a number of units will be down, with the predominant leaning that every other unit within a slot bank will be dark with its dedicated seat removed. In this situation, banks with odd numbers of slot units on each side of the bank, or even a carousel format, provide much greater opportunity to maximize the total units open, especially in space-constrained floors. Implementing some simple, limited reconfigurations on the floor may make sense in some instances to extend or reduce banks to such odd number configurations to maximize occupancy under these social distancing rules, especially for those banks of machines that have the highest win per unit yields on the floor. Now, there's some consideration of including transparent, perhaps plexiglass barriers between slot units. This obviously requires some additional capital and some type of fixation to the existing slot bases. There is mixed opinion on how this would work, what the guest perception would be, and maintenance issues related to such fixtures, but it's definitely being considered by some operators. As it relates to hotels, we are seeing some different approaches on occupancy. There is talk by some of having scaled occupancy, and some are even discussing leaving rooms unoccupied for a certain period of time, whether 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours. I think each market is different, and that may partially dictate, I think, the approach on hotels. On valet, the heavy consensus seems to be leaning towards no valet offered, at least at reopening for a casino or even for the hotel for now. And then, of course, in restaurants, it's pretty understood that there will be reduced capacity and new seating configurations to create more spacing. I don't know of anyone who believes that they will open or reopen with their buffet in operation. For meetings and conventions, this one is a real unknown. In the event we are living in a reality that we live in today, or even if it's a little better, it is safe to say that there will be a far reduced demand for group business, both because of the economic impacts and then, of course, health safety concerns. But even for those potential opportunities for group business, I'm not sure how practical it is to actually hold meetings with social distancing requirements, or at least how we think they may be at reopening. I think there's going to be an effort by many to continue to pursue the business, but I believe the speed for which we can loosen up the social distancing requirements will dictate the success of those efforts. And for nightlife and entertainment, I think it's safe to say in the current environment, and until we are much closer to the positive area of the spectrum of scenarios that I referenced earlier, that social distancing measures make live entertainment venues and nightlife venues very challenging to operate, if not impossible in most traditional formats. Now, outside the specific elements, a couple more points on proactive planning. First, for operators, regulators will obviously have a say and will be a key party in what happens. To the extent they are receptive to it, it may bode well to approach them first with your plans, even though you know the plans will change and continue to evolve. It'll be mutually beneficial to them and you, as the sooner you can learn what is feasible and acceptable, the easier it is to plan. And finally, as it relates to operational planning, once a reopening date has been determined, the initial policies and procedures have been established, I think it's extremely important that management should conduct pre-opening exercises that allow various team members to test and experience the guest journey throughout the process, just like you would do when opening the property for the first time. The additions and modifications in policies and procedures are material enough to create significant anxiety and uncertainty to warrant these exercises. In addition, as the exercises become more refined, I'd invite the regulators to participate so there's a mutual appreciation of expectations. And of course, as part of planning, the approach to marketing, the next bullet point, will certainly be impacted. I know Josh on our panel, he's our expert and will spend time on the topic, but I did want to throw out a few observations on how operators are approaching the marketing programs. First, I believe there is an understanding that loyalty program customers want their status and benefits extended under the property's loyalty program. It sounds like most properties will be doing that. Second, naturally, marketing programs moving forward, at least until things loosen up, will be without real touch points. For example, gift giveaways will be avoided. Third, more progressive operators that have social gaming platforms, or if lucky enough, actual online pay-for-play gaming platforms, have and will continue to leverage this opportunity for awareness, acquisition, and creating incentives via online play to drive their customer to the property once it is open. And finally, I sense that there is a feeling from operators that it's probably too risky to immediately launch large-scale marketing campaigns that may over-promote a quick return upon reopening without first understanding the physical capacity constraints that may be created by social distancing and crowd limitation policies. However, I would add that strategic marketing teams that are willing to spend significant effort to plan ahead should also undertake scenario planning, develop a portfolio of campaign options with appropriate incentives to drive business that can be launch ready upon reopening after actual assessment of initial volumes and within the context of the current constraints in place. And finally, to finish up with my last two bullet points, first, the importance of communication and perception. And this applies both to team members and customers. The operating environment can evolve and change very quickly, so that there needs to be consistent and frequent communication to the team. Naturally, there potentially will be a lot of anxiety among the team members, whether it's economic driven or health concerns. This is also the time for leaders on the property to step up. Management should be out in front and be present. To the extent there are no health or social distancing issues, managers, directors, VPs, C-level should all spend time on the floor and in the front of house with their team. That will not only make them feel more comfortable that they are working in a safe environment, but also they'll know that their leadership understands their situation and is concerned for their well-being. Communication to guests is also very important. I'm a customer in the database of numerous properties, and I receive emails from almost all of them, but I can tell you that some are doing a great job and some seem to be missing the opportunity. Because of home sheltering, operators have the attention of their customers like no other time before, and amazingly, customers are at home are actually reading this stuff. And now that you have their attention, there's a tremendous opportunity to communicate what you want. It is important that as the plan evolves, communicating the steps you are taking to protect their health and safety should be clearly enumerated and frequently communicated. In addition, proactive operators will implement surveys during this time of closure so you understand their perceptions of what is important to them to get them comfortable in visiting the property. And now finally, my last bullet point, opportunities moving forward. I think if states feel the economic pinch of unemployment and lost tax revenues, it presents opportunities to make legislative changes, including, specifically in this case, the opportunity to push for legalization of online gaming. Online gaming is inevitable. Eventually, there will be a point, even if it's 10 years from now, that taste and preferences will dictate that a large portion, if not a majority of gaming revenues, will be generated online. I cannot imagine a better time to illustrate to elected officials the need for online gaming. And for online gaming operators that have executed well during this time period, they've seen tremendous growth. Early numbers indicate 60 to 70% for those handful of U.S. jurisdictions where it's currently permitted. Along with online gaming, there are other opportunities as well, such as pushing for regulatory changes that allow operators to adapt to a changing environment, where there's different rules on cash handling or the number of people required to perform certain functions, such as jackpot payouts. And finally, it's a great time to revisit technology that allow you to move away from human interaction and touch points to automation. And so that ends my part of the presentation. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen to my comments. And with that, I'll turn it now back over to Michael. Michael?
Thank you, Bobby. That was very insightful. We're going to just remind everyone, come back at the end and seek to get some of your questions answered. Our second presenter today is Ellen Whitmore. She is going to provide an overview of how Wynn Resorts has addressed business challenges during COVID-19 and speak to the Wynn Las Vegas Health and Sanitation Program, now probably the most visible reopening guidelines in hospitality. So we're drilling down now. We're kind of gone from Bobby's high-level assessment. We're going to do a case study now, and then we're going to drill into marketing with Josh. So I'll turn it over to you, Ellen.
Thanks. If you could just start with the first slide, Bobby. I thought your presentation was very insightful and helpful to kind of lay the framework for my presentation. And I want to give a little historical background. From our perspective, the safety and welfare of our employees and our guests have always been our paramount concern. We have a unique experience, perhaps, in that we were faced with the effects of COVID-19 much earlier than any of our U.S. Competitors, except, of course, with the exception of Las Vegas Sands and MGM. So from January going forward, actually, we have been aware of the serious health consequences from COVID-19 probably before most people in the United States recognized the severity of the disease. And so from the very beginning, we have retained experts in infectious disease control and in public health and safety to really advise us and guide us in the steps that we were going to take as a company. We were very supportive of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission in ordering the closure of the casinos in that jurisdiction. At the time, Massachusetts had just seen the beginning of its spike with the healthcare conference, seeing 100 people diagnosed with the COVID-19. And then we were very proactive in Nevada. We made an announcement that we were going to close about 24 hours before the governor of the state ordered closure. We made some very difficult decisions when we made those decisions to close. One of the things that we decided to do was to pay all of our employees their full wages, including gratuities, through originally April 15th and of course now through May 15th. And part of the reason was not because we were flush with cash any more than anybody else was, but that Matt Maddox, our CEO, had been with the company through 2008 during the recession, and he had seen how difficult it was to rehire and retrain our employees. We like to say that we have the best employees in the gaming industry, and I'm sure some of the listeners would disagree with that, but we all think our employees are the best. But we didn't want to be in a situation where people didn't have a job and that we had to go back and they went and found something else, and then we were trying to recruit for those positions. We also wanted to really make it easy as possible for us to have our employees stay home and practice the physical distancing that was then required. We felt that it was a business imperative that we do both of those things. And we also recognized that although we were paying our employees, many people are part of a two-income household and their spouse would be unemployed. So we also enhanced our employee lifeline fund, increased the amount of money that we dedicated to it, and also increased the amount of money that an employee could seek on an emergency basis to pay for the unexpected expenses they had with one member of their household being unemployed. If you just, the next slide, please. We looked originally when all of this happened and we knew what we were doing with our employees, we were hopeful that federal legislation would give us some opportunity to continue to employ our employees. And as all of you know, the CARES Act really made it very difficult for almost all gaming companies, including ours, to be eligible for that investment because it required that your company be investment grade. And I think there's only a handful, if a handful, that of gaming companies that actually meet that investment grade. But we were very lucky that we were able to go out and issue $600 million in bonds to help us maintain sufficient liquidity throughout the crisis. And we were also able to renegotiate our covenant waivers with our lenders so that we also would look at those ratio and covenant requirements after we've reopened and hopefully have gotten back to business. We've also worked very, very closely with the Nevada Resort Association and the American Gaming Association to talk about pre-opening strategies, to talk about the strategies for additional financial relief. We worked with the AGA on its recent letter regarding the Main Street facilities, suggesting that the subsidiaries of publicly traded companies should be eligible for loans under the Main Street facilities. And so we'll wait to see whether that was a successful push on our part. But we think that the industry is strongest when it speaks together. And so we're very thankful for both our Nevada Resort Association and the AGA. We also, as Bobby mentioned, we continued to engage with our customers, not only through direct marketing, but through Instagram and Twitter. We have seen an incredible increase in the number of followers on our Instagram account. And we think that it is in part because of the steps that we had taken at closing. We've also engaged with our employees on a daily basis. We have a daily wire that they receive. We also have sent out important emails, SMS text messages, and we have a new Instagram account specifically for Wynn employees. So we wanted to keep that engagement by our customers, or excuse me, our customers and our employees. One of the things that we also did was continue to encourage volunteerism by our employees. We've had various departments suggest that their employees should at least donate 2 to 3 hours a week on virtual volunteerism. We continued to contribute to our communities, which gave our employees and our customers a sense of we were doing the right thing. We've contributed over $2.8 million to our communities since the closing. And then, as Bobby mentioned, Matt Maddox has really been, Bobby and Michael both mentioned this. Matt really has been very forward thinking on trying to establish a path to go forward. And the full plan can be found on our website. I'm just going to hit over a couple of key points with you. Again, we had retained our experts in public health and infectious disease, and they reviewed our plan page by page, line by line, gave us advice. We're very comfortable that today it's the best possible advice we have. It could change tomorrow. The CDC may come back and say 6 feet of distancing is not sufficient. You need to have 10 feet. You know, the Southern Nevada Health District may in fact come back and tell us that we need to do more than we're doing, but we'll continue to monitor those. And then the last thing I want to point out, this plan is our plan. It works for us, or well, let me back up. We think it's going to work for us from an operational viewpoint. We didn't do this top down. We did this bottom up. We went to all of the departments and said, okay, here are your criteria. You know, here's the CDC guidance. Here's the criteria that have been established. How do we effectuate that? So we're very comfortable that we have an operational buy-in to this plan. But again, we're not going to know until we actually open. And we say, yes, we said we were going to clean our card shoe every 45 minutes. Well, that might not work, so we might have to change. But so it goes back to the comment, you have to be flexible. This is what we plan on doing today, April 23rd. By the time we're given permission to open, which we anticipate will be sometime in the later portion of May, the plan may be different, but at least this starts the discussion among members of the industry and with our gaming regulatory associations and with our regulators to say, this is how we are looking at things. As I mentioned, we're not exactly sure when we're going to be allowed to reopen. The governor of Nevada has been not as specific in dates by which he thinks we may satisfy the criteria that he's established for reopening. we think that in Clark County, our personal belief is in Clark County, we're a little bit further ahead than the rest of the state on some of the criteria, testing, hospital beds, things like that. But we understand he's taking a look at it from the state as a whole. So we would hope that within the next week or so, we'll get a clearer understanding of when he will authorize other businesses to open, knowing that the other businesses that open will have to we won't have be able to see any increase in cases in order for the casinos to open. In Massachusetts, we're in a little bit different position because they haven't even gotten close to being at their peak. Well, I shouldn't say they're not even close. They're close to being at their peak, but that it is a much more difficult situation, particularly in the Boston area. Lots of public transportation, lots of healthcare workers. And also that they're part of the East Coast Consortium. So we're not anticipating that there'll be a decision with the casinos in Massachusetts that would allow us to reopen in May. Going forward, one of the interesting things that Bobby said was the consumer confidence. And although I think we did all of the things that we were going to do for all of the right reasons, keeping our employees employed, continue to contribute to our communities, continue to encourage our employees to engage in volunteerism, getting our financial footing in place. We did those for all the right reasons, but they had the added benefit of creating more confidence in us as a company than we had anticipated. We know from a number of marketing efforts by various organizations that when customers come back to gaming, they are going to reward the casinos that have taken care of their employees, that have continued to contribute to the community. So we think we're going to have that step up on our marketing. And we do think that by having this strong of a plan on how we are going to reopen, we'll give our guests the confidence to return and enjoy themselves in Las Vegas. What that's going to look like, I don't know, or when it's going to happen. We have just guesses as to when we'll be able to see the same kind of numbers who used to attend our events or nightclubs or shows. We're not anticipating any in the near future, but we do think that if we and the industry as a whole embraces these safety protocols, whatever they may end up being, that we will give the customers confidence, notwithstanding our mayor's comments yesterday. We will continue to liaise with our regulatory agencies and our state governments on a path to reopening. We do think there's going to have to be some regulatory relief. We're going to open in, it's not going to be a situation where you open your entire casino floor. You're not going to open all your restaurants. You probably are not going to open up all your hotel towers. And in some jurisdictions, there's, restrictions that say you have to keep your casinos open. And maybe we need to reconsider just letting somebody walk in and walk around if they're not going to be gambling or eating dinner at your location. So we've got to consider to do that. Consider talking to our regulators about that. We all will be taking a look at payment processing situations going forward. We think that the e-payment is an area in which there can be enhancements, and that there are places where we would be able to take advantage of using credit cards where we're not currently allowed to use credit cards and things like that. And we want to, we'll continue to monitor and support legislation that encourages us to reopen. We're looking at potential, and hopefully this is where our state organizations can be helpful. We need some liability protection. And it's something that just came out yesterday or today about Disney. Disney was going to put out a notice, apparently it was kind of leaked, that by coming to Disneyland when you come back, that you're assuming responsibility, that they're not warranting to you that you aren't going to get COVID-19. We can make all of those disclosures, and you could put the notice on the front door and you could put it on the registration statement. But the problem is that if somebody visits your casino and is subsequently diagnosed with COVID-19, they're going to try to allege that they got the COVID-19 there. Now, whether they're going to ever be able to prove it or not is certainly another factor, but we think that that the organization should really take a look at supporting legislation that would give immunity, except in the cases of gross negligence, things like that. We think that the key to all of this is we have to take it slowly. We have to take baby steps. We have to reopen other than casinos. We have to see how each of those businesses do in the social distancing. And we have to be willing to stop and say, we can't continue to operate this way. We need to pull back. We can't operate at that restaurant, or we need to, reduce even the number of tables that we have on the floor. So it is evolving, and you do have to be flexible. I will say that currently, I think you've all seen this, but I'll just give you a couple of highlights. We are going to be using thermal cameras. We had them ordered, had them installed before we closed. We are going to require physical distancing. We won't allow people to be closer than 6 feet to each other. We will have hand sanitizers throughout the property. Guests who come will be given a amenity bag, and rather than chocolates, the amenity bag will include hand sanitizers and masks. We will require all of our employees and all of our guests to wear masks. We are taking all of this very, very seriously, and we want people to come back and have fun, but we want them to come back and be safe.
Thank you, Ellen. That was very helpful. And I think we're going to move to Josh pretty quickly here so we can maybe fit some questions in. But just from what's coming in and listening to Bobby and Ellen, this exercise of taking revenue forecasting, which is something we're involved in, and matching it to what a customer's tolerance and expectations are, reminds me a lot of IRs in Japan, for example, where we don't know exactly how the customer will respond to a product or a situation they haven't been pushed to experience yet. So we'll all be watching that. We're going to move now to our final presenter, John Swissman. Josh is going to share strategies for analytics, player engagement, loyalty, and brand positioning while emerging from COVID-19 crisis. Josh.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Happy to be here and honored to present to this fine group alongside these amazing leaders, Ellen and Bobby. Let's go to the next slide. We'll jump right in. As I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, this book by Marshall Goldsmith kept popping into my mind, at least the title of the book. And as I think about casino operators and the decisions that we're all going to have to make in the coming weeks, it's so apropos, right? What got you here won't get you there. You heard it in great detail from Ellen, and you heard it from Bobby as well. And so we as a collective industry definitely need to think differently. So allow me to, next slide, please, share some topics that I think will be relevant. First, we'll cover analytics and the role that analytics plays in the critical reopening period. Then we'll shift to how we should engage our players and our guests. Bobby touched on it. I have a little bit more detail behind it. That'll lead us into a high-level discussion around how we should be thinking differently about our loyalty programs. And lastly, we'll wrap up with some different thoughts around brand positioning. Next slide, please. So with analytics first, analytics should really be used at this point to find a way to say yes. You know, this is not the time for analytics to be used to get overly surgical when we do have these large-scale promotional campaigns that we want to put out there, most likely in a phased approach, like Bobby talked about, so that demand doesn't overwhelm diminished supply. But analytics should be used to figure out how to grow the population, to make it as big as possible, and let as many people know that our casinos are safe again, that our doors are open again, that we're ready for business, and communicate any sort of necessary procedures and other awareness that need to be communicated as well. Now, that said, we should focus on a big population, but I still think the 80-20 rule is going to apply post shutdown, and we're still going to need to hug our best guests like we have for decades. Obviously, with social distancing measures, Ellen, we're not going to physically hug them, but it is a great time to use analytics to increase the amount of segmentation that typically goes on with the upper end of our databases. You know, it's my experience that this group of guests is one that appreciates personalization and that extra touch. It's a high touch population, and this is a great time to leverage analytics to make that happen. Now, thinking more broadly about the database, it does seem likely that marketers are going to have to reinvest more than we historically have to jumpstart the business. And I don't want people to freak out about that. I think that's okay as long as it's done strategically and with a solid analytical backing. And my thinking here is that let your increased reinvestment strategy be driven from an incremental profit standpoint. You know, there are plenty of guests that for one reason or another are unprofitable and have been for some time. And look, we can certainly reinvest more in those folks, and they will come, and they'll come often, and they'll drive up market share. But they'll actually have the complete opposite effect on earnings and the bottom line. And since you can't take market share to the bank, my preference is to focus on profit and earnings there. So keep that in mind. I will have for each of the sections a stretch goal, or as I call it, a game changer idea with each of the topics. For analytics, the game changer idea is simple. It's to look outside, right? It's time to look outside the four walls of our casinos. It's time to look outside the confines of our own databases to punch up our analytical firepower. So consider these couple ideas. How about leveraging mobile location data, which will help you better identify defectors, guests that are more likely now going to your competitors instead of your properties, or to estimate share of wallet. If you have these two metrics in place and you can measure those effectively, that really does level up your analytical firepower, and your marketing will improve as a result. Another option to consider is something along the lines of a sentiment analysis. This is an analysis that shows how your guests are communicating and behaving on social media and other platforms. It's a great tool to provide additional insight into your casino's own communication strategy, and it allows you to align that communication strategy more closely with how your guests are communicating. So again, just a couple topics there on the analytics front. Next slide, please. We'll move on to player engagement. And we'll talk about different ways that we should be engaging our players and guests. First and foremost, you heard it from Bobby, be flexible. Guests are going to feel uncertain about how and when they're going to return to our casinos. Let's give them some optionality to account for this uncertainty. And what I mean by that is, if our offers are normally valid for 1 week historically, make them valid for 3 weeks going forward for the next little while. Guests will really appreciate that additional flexibility. They'll appreciate that extended redemption window, and you'll be rewarded with additional visitation from those guests as a result. I also think it's important to stay consistent with your messaging. Ellen said it best, you know, what's gone on in the last 5 weeks as far as how you've communicated to your guests should really dictate your communication strategy for the next 5 months and beyond. As an example, if you've been communicating exclusively through direct mail since shutdown to your guests, to keep them up to date and keep them engaged and let them know progress. As you're contemplating your big relaunching promotional campaigns, now's not the time to switch everyone to email. stick with direct mail in this example. It does so much for creating more certainty and more understanding in the guest mindset, and sticking with those same messaging channels and with that same tone will also help build trust with the guests. So again, as I mentioned before, there is going to be some increase in reinvestment in the short term. And again, I implore the group to focus that additional reinvestment on your more profitable players and take a bottom line approach. Additionally, when you're thinking about how you're going to plus up your reinvestment strategy, I'd ask the group to consider leveraging those lower cost assets. Think about comp room nights to the extent that this is a meaningful incentive that you can offer your guests. You know, for better or for worse, we are all going to have excess hotel room inventory on our hands. We might as well take advantage of it anyways. And it's a smart bottom line driven approach to adding some reinvestment and some oomph to your marketing campaigns. So my game changer for the player engagement section, Bobby touched on it. Technology is huge right now. I've been amazed with how much more tech savvy the world has become in the last 5 to 6 weeks. I've got grandparents that now know how to use Zoom to speak to their grandkids. It's amazing. It's a perfect time for a casino to build an app as well. This tech savviness and this wave of increased utilization that Ellen touched on as well in terms of social channels is a great time to put forth additional benefits through an app that you could build to highlight things like touchless interaction on property. We heard a little bit about that. And it also allows you to boost your real-time marketing capacity and your real-time guest engagement, even when those guests aren't on property, which is where the world is going anyway, so there's no better time than now. Moving on to the loyalty program piece of it, first, recommunicate. What I mean by that is many casinos made some short-term changes to their loyalty programs, like suspending their tier credit and point expiration policies. These were amazing goodwill gestures that need to be recommunicated again. First, recommunicate them to provide additional player clarity. Second, it was a great goodwill gesture, so you should get an added positive guest service impression out of it, which is incredibly important as we open our doors again. Flexibility comes into play here as well. Just like with player engagement, optionality in the short term is important from a loyalty program standpoint. So think about extending those expirations for say the next 90 days of point expiration. If you work at a casino that doesn't normally allow for points to be redeemed for food and beverage, why not for the next 90 days allow those points to be redeemed for food and beverage? I know it sounds like an expensive proposition, but given recent accounting changes, it actually is relatively inexpensive, and it presents just an incredibly high perceived value in the player's eyes. And again, you'll be rewarded with additional visitation for that. Next up is hit the accelerator. Do whatever you can to get guests back to their past tier levels ASAP through any number of specific marketing campaigns tied to that. It's a good way to build up equity in guest equity in your loyalty program and to build up switching costs, which keeps your players coming back to you instead of your competitor. Now, the game changer on this one is a heavy lift, but I think that it could be worthwhile for a lot of casinos around the country, and that is, consider giving your loyalty program an overhaul right now. And if not a full overhaul, consider giving it a makeover. Now, I mentioned this on the slide that guest behavior has changed forever, and it's time to make your loyalty program align with that change in guest behavior and make whatever changes are necessary. For instance, as an example, if you think the majority of your guests at the lower end of your database are going to come back with reduced gaming wallets, perhaps you should lower the qualification threshold to get from that first tier of the loyalty program to the second tier of the loyalty program. It's a great way to show those guests that we value you. It's a great way to build up equity in the guest size in terms of the loyalty program. It's just one of a whole host of different options that you can consider when taking a look at revamping your loyalty program. Next slide, please. And this is actually the last slide from me, brand positioning. So you'll see some important concepts that you may want to weave into your post-shutdown brand positioning. Look, we all know that the majority of the country, the majority of the world really, has been sheltering in place for weeks on end, and when it's safe, people are going to want to escape on much needed getaways. Again, no matter what jurisdiction we're talking about, I predict that the staycation will make a huge comeback here. At the same time, as guests start to step out of their homes and back onto our casino floors, I do think that they're going to look for value in different ways than they have historically. And so the notion of value will need to be interwoven into the brand positioning as well. So just a couple of points here. When I think about escape and how to integrate that into brand positioning, think about any assets that you might have on your property that are quote unquote escapism assets, like a spa or a really cool suite or your steakhouse. Make sure that you're highlighting those to invoke that notion of wanting to get away and wanting to escape. And just to be clear, when I say value and incorporating value into brand positioning, I am not talking about deep discounts here. There are so many ways to integrate value into brand positioning that don't harm the bottom line. At the same time, we've spent a lot of time talking about sanitation and safety measures that we're going to have to take, and there's going to be a heightened sense of awareness in the guest's eyes around those new measures. And I know those aren't the sexiest things, but they do go a long way in building trust. And trust is an incredibly important component of brand positioning in any industry. It is supremely important in the gaming industry, so keep that in mind. And as you think about how that part of your brand positioning might translate to your gaming floor, think about those new sanitation procedures. You know, they're not going to happen at 3 a.m. when no one's on property anymore. They're going to happen right in front of your guests, right at peak time, by employees that are wearing masks and gloves and other protective equipment. And the guests will be watching. So I think that this is a tremendous opportunity to deliver a huge positive guest interaction from your team members by encouraging them to give a heartfelt, warm greeting, a thank you, and a smile as they're cleaning those button decks or wiping down that blackjack table rail. I promise you that the guests will see that smile through that mask. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the last slide. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time again, and I'd like to turn it back over to Michael now.
Thank you, Josh. So as we approach the top of the hour, we've really run out of allotted time for questions, but we will follow up with each of the individual questions that were asked and to the group where appropriate, just to give you a flavor, because we had such great information today that the questions were equally intriguing. People are curious about specifics of SOPs. They're very interested in the types of brands and vendors that have been used for certain solutions. They're interested in how to approach forecasting within the ranges Bobby discussed and how to deal with demand scenarios. They're interested in, from Ellen, whether the Macau experience translates to the US experience. And there are even some questions to last week's topics about lending and how to deal with banks. So we're going to keep a running tab and have timely responses for people. I wish we had time to answer them online, but we have reached the top of the hour. And I just want to thank our speakers before I turn it back over to Christina to formally wrap up the webinar.
All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you all the speakers, and thank you to all of you guys who really did participate in this webinar. A lot of questions came through, and that's really exciting when we know that we're reaching you. It is our hope that today's presentation provided some useful takeaways during this very unprecedented time in the casino gaming industry. Any additional feedback or questions, you can send those to info@casinowebinar.com. As we mentioned in the beginning, a recording of this webinar will be made available at casinowebinar.com, as well as a PDF version of the slideshow presented. Please continue to monitor casinowebinar.com for those updates. Our next session is next Thursday, April 30th at 2 p.m. This will be Tribal Troubles, How Indian Gaming Will Rebound. We have some exciting speakers for you, and again, you can register for that at casinowebinar.com. Thank you again, everyone, for your time today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.